Before we get into today's material, I want to talk a little bit about the summary homework assignment, because there were some sort of common issues that I saw many people were having. By and large, you guys did all right on the general summary portion, right? You know, just trying to condense the whole thing down into 500 words. It was the second part of the assignment that seemed to give everybody a little bit more trouble. So first, just a couple of formal things that were issues across the board. This is a relatively small issue, but it means a lot to me. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but it's generally standard practice to double space everything. It just makes it a lot easier for the person evaluating your work to read. Secondly, whoever's phone that is, please turn it off. You need to arrange ideas into paragraphs, right? A lot of you just sort of gave me these giant blocks of largely undifferentiated text. If you're arranging it into paragraphs, right, what this shows me is that you understand which ideas in the piece are related to each other, right? It shows me where you are shifting gears, right? Okay, I'm going to talk about something else now. It shows me that you know how to organize a piece of writing. Now, are the paragraphs in some of your longer papers probably going to be a little bit disordered? Yeah, but we'll work on that, right? The point is first to try to make sure that you're getting ideas that are related to each other into single paragraphs. Now, one thing that most of you did seem to understand for the first summary was that you just needed to cover the most important stuff, right? You needed to get the important stuff out of the way. You didn't need to cover the whole thing. And most of you actually did a really pretty good job of cutting out what seemed to you like the fat. Now, the fat wasn't the same for each of you, which is also a good thing. You all emphasize different things. But one thing that I did notice was sometimes a problem. First, everything in a summary must be in your own words. Some of you were borrowing a little bit too much specific language from the original piece. So what you needed to try to do was find ways to put all of that stuff into your own words. Now the reason for this, right? Now I know this was not the intent, but what do we call it if you're taking someone else's language or ideas and not giving them credit for it? Exactly. So, and I don't want any of you to wander accidentally down that path. I don't want any of you to wander on purpose down that path either. But just make sure if you're doing something like a summary that you're putting everything into your own language. Yes?
Like, you using like weird words because it's like fiction.
Uh-huh.
So it was like Middle Earth and things like that.
Yeah. Well, okay, what you're talking about is a special case there, right? So if he's using sort of specialized words, and this is not just going to be the case in like, you know, a fantasy writer who's making shit up, right? This is going to happen sometimes when you're reading like a scholarly article in whatever your discipline is. Right? There's a specific language, there's a particular jargon that goes with that field that people in the field are expected to know. So if you're writing for somebody who's not in that field, then yeah, you're going to use that specific word, but you're also going to define it for the reader, right? So, you know, if you use a word like mathem, which is, you know, the word that shows up in Tolkien's piece, right? Make sure you explain what it is in your own words. And if you do borrow someone else's language or someone else's idea, it always has to be cited, right? This brings me to a related point. I know that several of you are friends outside of class. Some of you are even more closely related outside of class and inside of class as well. So don't do these assignments together, right? I want you to be doing these on your own. I want you to be doing them by yourselves. This way we avoid any difficulty over, people saying very, very similar things, right? Who seem to be working together on assignments, right? Don't do that. Work on it by yourself. If you need help, then feel free to come talk to me. Right, now as far as the second part was concerned, the part with which most of you seem to have a little more trouble, I think what a lot of you did, rather than picking out a particular pattern or theme that you wanted to write your second summary about, what you did was take a particular section of the prologue that you decided you were going to write your second piece about. Like you decided you would, okay, well, I'll just write it about Bilbo finding the ring, or I'll just write it about the pipeweed portion, or that sort of thing, right? That wasn't really what I was looking for you to do. What I wanted you to do was find this sort of connecting thread or pattern that ran through the whole thing that you could then summarize, or to produce a much more focused summary of that pattern. So for example, instead of simply writing about, like summarizing Bilbo's adventures, right? One person actually adopted a very smart strategy and focused the summary on what characteristics of hobbits make them unlikely heroes. So that then, by the time you get to the end, it's like, okay, so clearly hobbits aren't made for this, and yet Bilbo does this anyway. So, you picked on, hobbits' softness, hobbits not wanting to leave home, hobbits close to their families, right? All these sorts of things that indicate a closeness to their specific land, their specific kin group, and a reluctance to wander. And then relating that to sort of what makes Bilbo unusual, right? That was actually a really good, solid strategy. You could do other things, okay, so I see that hobbits tend to eat more than they need to, and they are always passing around useless objects to each other, right? So clearly, right, they have more than they need, right? So you can sort of look at this sort of theme of hobbits as a people having more stuff than they need and not knowing what to do with those things, right? That was more the sort of thing I was, looking for you to do. Now, does anybody have any questions about this before we move on to other stuff today? Basically what the goal was, or what I'm trying to get you to do, is focus on description of, I keep hearing that same sound. Whoever's phone is making that sound, please silence it or turn it off. And
It's somebody towards the front.
What's that?
It's somebody towards the front, so y'all want to check our phone and see.
If everybody could just make sure that it's off and that there's. It's when that sound keeps going off, it's really distracting. Yes. Okay.
I've never seen The Lord of the Rings, because I'm not really into it. So
Yeah.
Bilbo is a hobbit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, the prologue should give you enough to get that, right? You should be able to summarize the prologue without having read the whole book or seen the movie.
I was confused. I was like, okay, why are we talking about I've seen clips of it. My mom watched it before.
Sure.
I thought Bill was the regular human guy. I didn't know.
Pardon?
Who's the regular human guy?
Well, and look, the idea was not like, the idea was really just to sort of stick to the handout I gave you, right? The idea was not to use any prior knowledge or any other anything from outside,
No,
right?
I was just asking because, like, in my summary,
Uh-huh.
I think I kind of, you probably read it like, what is she talking about? Like, Hobbit. I was like, Bilbo took the ring from the Hobbit. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Probably all of it.
Okay, look, the idea basically, right, is careful sustained attention to a single piece and detailed description of the parts of that piece, right? And then detailed description is supposed to allow you to zero in on some more specific portion that you can then offer a more detailed description of. This is the sort of thing that you build arguments on, right? So what we're working towards is building interpretations, building arguments, rather than actually producing them at this point. Now, we are going to talk today about how these observations, these details that you're coming up with, are related to the arguments you're going to be making about them. Right? So, in any argumentative piece, you're going to find two basic types of sentence, along with some that are harder to classify. The basic sentence types you're going to find are, right, claim and evidence. So what's a claim? When I talk about a claim, what do I mean?
You're making a statement that you want the audience to think is true.
Yeah, I'm trying to persuade you something is true, right? Is it something that is already objectively true? Yeah, a claim is a statement that is not objectively true, right? It's not a fact, right? It's your interpretation of a particular piece of evidence. It's what you want your reader to think about a particular piece of evidence, right? The conclusion you want them to draw from it. So evidence then is what? Yeah. When we talk about evidence, we're talking generally about factual material, right? Concrete observations.
Not always true, though.
What's not always true?
Evidence.
Pardon?
The evidence ain't always true, though.
When we talk about evidence, right, when we're talking about concrete facts, right, interpretations of it can differ, right?
Yeah.
But if we say, like, that, you know, the unemployment rate of the United States is 7.9%, you can quibble over what you mean by unemployment rate and whether that counts everybody, right? But you can't quibble over the fact that the official rate is 7.9%, right? People are going to read facts, they're going to read evidence different ways, but evidence is generally that which can't be factually challenged. And it's not just what you use to back up a claim, right? Evidence is what you use to generate a claim in the first place, right? Remember that the claim is your interpretation of a particular piece or a particular set of evidence, right? So the first step in understanding how all this works is making sure that you can distinguish a claim from evidence, right? That you know the difference. All right, so I'm going to put two sentences up on the board here, and you tell me which is the claim and which is evidence. All right. Andrew Jackson held racist attitudes towards Native Americans. Right, that's sentence one. Sentence two. He sent the Cherokee from Georgia to Oklahoma. On the Trail of Tears. All right. So what's the claim and what's evidence? Okay. Yeah. First sentence. Yeah. First one is the claim, right? What makes this a claim?
You can't prove it just by saying it.
Yeah. The fact that I say it doesn't make it true, right? It's something I would have to convince you of. It's something I would have to provide evidence to back up, right? Now, what about the second sentence?
That's the evidence. It's something that happened.
Yeah, that's the evidence, right? This is an objective historical fact that I am interpreting in a particular way, right, to make a claim. Right? I am drawing a claim from this piece of evidence. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the logic connecting claim and evidence in a moment, right? How you draw particular claims from particular pieces of evidence. But let's just do a little bit more practice with this. So I'm going to give you an example now. This is from a book by George Orwell called The Road to Wigan Pier. Right. Middle-class people are fond of saying that the miners with an E, not with an O, wouldn't wash themselves properly even if they could. But this is nonsense. Sentence 2. Where pithead baths, that is baths that are actually located at mining pits, exist, practically all the men use them. All right, so which is the claim and which is evidence?
The first is the claim.
Okay, why is this? What makes this a claim? How can we tell this is a claim?
Because he's claiming something about a class of people that you can't prove objectively true. Or like that isn't like, it's something you have to prove, not something that's...
Okay, yeah, this is something you would have to prove. And what's our giveaway that this is like? Is this actually just one claim?
No.
It says, but this is nonsense. This is like
Yeah.
putting like that emotion into it, like
Mhm.
that. You can tell it's coming from like somebody, not like a fact or like a theory or anything like that.
Right. He's declaring someone else's claim nonsense, right? Which shows that he's trying to make a counterclaim here. Right. But this is nonsense. And indeed, the first part of the sentence is also a claim, right? It's just not a claim that he's making. It's a claim he's reacting against. Right? He's setting up his claim as a counter to this other claim. Right? Middle class people are fond of saying the miners wouldn't wash themselves properly even if they could. Okay, and then the second sentence, right? This is the evidence that he's using to prove his claim, right? Clearly, because where there are baths at the mine pits, the men use them. The opinion of these sober middle class folk is wrong, right?
Yeah.
All right, good. So, let's try another one. This is from an essay by the art theorist Walter Benjamin called The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. Right, so The Greeks knew only two procedures of technically reproducing works of art. And number two, mechanical reproduction of a work of art represents something new.
So the first one is evidence.
Okay. First is evidence, right? This is a basic historical fact, right? That the Greeks only knew two methods of technically reproducing works of art. And from this claim is generated the idea, right, that mechanical reproduction, right, that is mass reproduction of works of art using a machine, is something that is new and different, right? All right, so knowing the difference between a claim and evidence for a claim is half the battle, but one thing you have to be able to do as well is describe what the connecting logic is between the claim and your evidence. There's a fairly simple way to think of this. There's a guy by the name of Stephen Toulmin. He wrote a book that I believe was called The Uses of Argument. And he divides all arguments up into three basic parts. Right. Claim, data, and warrant, right? The claim is the thing that you're trying to argue. It's the thing you're trying to demonstrate. The data is whatever piece of factual information you're using to back it up. And the warrant is the connecting logic that ties the data to the claim, right? This is why you can use this piece of data to make this claim. So I'm going to make the claim here that I am a U.S. citizen. The data that I'm going to use to back this up is that I was born in Pennsylvania. So what's my warrant here? Why can I use this piece of data to prove my okay, Pennsylvania is in the United States, and if you are born on U.S. soil, you're a citizen, right? Yes, the warrant for this is that anyone born on U.S. soil is a citizen, right? Now, if I used a different piece of data to back up the same argument, then my warrant would be different, right? So if I said instead that I'm a U.S. citizen because my parents were U.S. citizens, right? The warrant's slightly different then, right? The law also states that anyone born to U.S. citizens is themselves a citizen, right? Yes, did you have a question?
I was gonna say, could you relate that to influence?
Yeah, this is actually exactly why I wanted you guys to do the enthymeme exercise, right? To get used to finding the unstated logical connections between things, right? So let's practice this a little bit with the statements I've already put on the board. Let's start with the Andrew Jackson one, right? Okay. Claim, Andrew Jackson held racist attitudes towards Native Americans. Evidence, he sent the Cherokee from Georgia to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, right? What warrant would I need to do? What connecting logic would I need to provide to support this?
He removed them from their homelands.
Okay, yeah, so he did remove them from their homelands, right? And that's kind of, that's still sort of in the evidentiary statement there, right? What's the part that I need to prove in the claim? I don't need to prove that the Trail of Tears happened, right? I mean, that's historical fact. What do I have to prove was behind it?
Racist attitude.
Exactly, I would have to prove that that there was a racist motivation behind it, right? So I would have to find a connecting logic that demonstrated clear racist intent. So for example, yeah, moving them from Georgia to Oklahoma, from richer lands to poorer lands, and then resettling the richer lands with white settlers could be that could be used to demonstrate that the intent was racist, not some other purpose, right? So that would be an example of the sort of connecting logic we'd use there. All right, so let's look at these other two as well, right? So the first one here, right? Middle-class people are fond of saying that the miners wouldn't wash themselves properly even if they could, but this is nonsense. Where pithead baths exist, practically all the men use them. The connecting logic here should actually be fairly easy to determine, right?
Those down the bar, washing themselves properly.
Yeah. The fact that the men use the baths, right? That the fact that the men are washing themselves shows that the opinion of the middle class people is wrong in this case, right? Now what about this one down here? The Greeks knew only two procedures of technically reproducing works of art. Mechanical reproduction of a work of art represents something new. What's the warrant that connects these?
The number of techniques.
That the Greeks didn't have mechanical means to reproduce works of art.
Okay, the Greeks didn't have mechanical means to reproduce works of art, which means,
That's something we did.
yeah, that ancient peoples
Right.
did not have the means to reproduce works of art mechanically. Right. The important thing here about the Greeks is, right, we're talking about a past civilization. Right. Past civilizations didn't have the means to mechanically reproduce works of art. Therefore, mechanical reproduction of a work of art represents something new. Now, the reason I wanted to go over this with you, the reason I wanted to talk about this with you, is that this is something that we often forget to do when we're writing papers, right? It's not always going to be clear to your reader, or as clear as it is to you, why the evidence means what you say it means. And so you always need to spend some time explaining how you connected these statements logically, right? Where your interpretation of your evidence is coming from. What makes you believe this to be true? The evidence rarely speaks entirely for itself, right? In this case, it kind of does, but that's going to be pretty rare. Okay, so how do we go about generating claims, right? The textbook sort of presents two techniques. There's definitely one that it favors. Right. The two basic reasoning styles passed down to us from the Greeks are what we call inductive and deductive reasoning. Right. Does anybody know what the differences between these two? How inductive and deductive reasoning differ? In deductive reasoning, what do you start with?
Options and
Start with the role.
That's actually, yeah, when you're reasoning inductively, right, you start by looking at the data. And then you try to reason some claim from that data, right? So an inductive process of reasoning starts with observations about your data that lead to some general claim about it. Deductive reasoning starts with a general claim or principle that is then applied to a specific case. So it'll probably be easier to figure out the difference here if we actually try this. So I'm going to put up on the projector here a picture. I'm not going to tell you that much about the picture. Here's what I will tell you. It is the cover photo of a book. And I want you, as you look at this, I want you to think generally about book covers, what their purpose is, what they usually look like, how they're set up. And I want you to think about how effective this is as a book cover, how typical is this as a book cover, and find 10 things in the picture to explain your reasoning, right? How effective a book cover is this? How effective is this at what book covers are supposed to do? And 10 things in the picture that explain why. take about 2 more minutes, make sure you've really covered your bases. Shield your eyes for a minute. All right, the unpleasantness is past. Okay, so what is the basic purpose of the book cover?
To display the title,
Okay, draw your attention to explain what?
like the title, give you an idea of what the story is about.
Okay, give you an idea of what the story is about. Pardon?
Setting. Like
Sure.
It might be an older style writing, or like the setting will be like, back in the day,
Mhm.
1800s.
But what would all of that ultimately serve to do, right? Explaining the story, the setting to you, giving you the title, giving you some information about the book. What ultimately are you then supposed to do?
It's to sell the book.
It's to sell the book, yeah. It's to get you to pick it up and read it, right? So if we look at this particular book cover, right, as an example of a book cover, right, that's designed to sell a book, what do we notice about it?
It does a poor job of it.
Okay, why would you say it does a poor job of it?
I mean, if I'm at a bookstore and I just see a random picture of two people, it's not really going to draw me in.
Okay.
Well,
I'm just
maybe
gonna
if
look
you
at it.
were at a bookstore now, but maybe back when this photo was taken and the book was actually published, that might have been different.
I feel like the cover draws a more mature crowd. Like,
Okay. What about it suggests maturity to you, a mature crowd?
Like, I feel like if my grandma or my aunt walked into the bookstore and seen this book, no title on it,
Okay.
that they might grab it just because, like, that would be like they type of reading, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
I feel like if we walk in there and see this book, nobody in this room will pick it up.
Just a creepy picture.
Like he said, trying to sell it, I'm saying they trying to sell it to like a different crowd. You know what I mean?
Well, could the lack of a title actually be? I mean, I think there is something in what Andre's saying. That, like, could the lack of a title or an author name on the book actually be part of the selling strategy?
It's mysterious.
It makes you pick it up and see what title this is about.
Yep. Yeah. If you want to know anything about this book, you got to pick it up and open it, right? You're not going to be able to tell what the book is about or who wrote it unless you recognize the people on the cover, right? What else can we say about this, sort of as an example of a book cover, right? What's typical about it, what's not typical about it?
Well, it's atypical, again, as everyone's mentioned, the lack of a title or who the author is.
Uh-huh.
So when it comes to deciding whether or not to pick up the book, a lot of times, it would be name recognition.
Okay.
Which might influence someone's decision to buy the book or not.
Mm-hmm.
Invoke someone's curiosity. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
Okay. Yeah, that seems to be part of what they're playing on here, right? A sort of natural curiosity about the unknown. But is this leaving what other kind of image are they trying to convey about the book or about the author?
The author's probably like
Unconventional.
lived back in that time that the pictures seems to be depicting.
What time do we think that is?
I'd say 1800s.
1920s.
1920s.
Wow.
Well, I was gonna
60s.
say,
I'm thinking
I was
50s or
No, 60s.
60s.
Yeah, Chris and Ezra have got it. This is for the early 60s.
Yeah, 50 say that's.
Yeah.
It look like it's a crane he working on, whatever he did. And I ain't gonna lie to you, like for a second, it looked like he was just hung on the side of the building. The dude in the background.
Okay, well,
Statue.
yeah, that's
Oh, it
yeah.
looked like a dead person though.
But yeah, okay, yes. If we look at what's in the how is the if we think about the time period here, okay, so we know now this is the early 60s, right? Is the author depicted as a sort of can we tell which figure here is the author? Who do you think is the author?
The dude. Oh, the guy.
Okay, why would you say the guy?
He's the main, I guess, figure. in
Yeah, he's the
photo.
larger figure.
Yeah.
Okay, he's bigger, he's standing up, right? Yeah. Does he look like a conventional, sort of respectable individual in the early 60s? Why not?
Nobody should ever dress like that.
You're judging him by the standards of a different time.
Well, he's got a
Even in the
vest
60s.
Okay, he's wearing a vest, yeah.
and a well-trimmed hat.
Yeah.
I feel like, in my view, I feel like he might be a powerful individual though. Like, I feel like back then, if you was poor and then you wouldn't have clothes like that.
Well, if we look, I mean, wealth and power don't always equate, right?
Yeah.
Cultural influence and political power don't always what about him tells us if we think about say a businessman stereotype from the 50s or the kinds of guys who are TV dads on the 50s TV shows, right? Leave it to Beaver, father knows best, that shit. Okay, he's got a big bushy mustache, right? That was uncommon.
Clean
Of
shaven.
what appears to be a smile.
Okay,
Under
sort of
the
half
mustache.
smiling, yeah. And he's got shaggy hair, right? Which also in the early 60s, on an adult man, would have indicated more kind of hipster bohemian type, right? So that tells us a little bit about the audience that he's trying to go for, right? Is he trying to go for the sorts of people who are picking up things to read at the airport? Is he trying to pick up the busy businessman who is looking for something to read on the train on his way to work? No.
I say he trying to go for the older crowd.
Well, is he trying to go for an older crowd necessarily?
It's
Well,
a
they
certain
would know something
culture,
about
not
that
an age.
Yeah, I think that's it's more that he's not aiming at older people, right? He's aiming it at people with a certain sensibility, right? And how would we define he's a kind of hipstery looking dude, right, for the era. How would we define that sensibility? Yeah, hippie types, yeah.
Just carefree,
Pardon?
carefree,
Yeah.
not so, I guess structured and regimented.
Mm-hmm. Right, people who don't fit into the normal kind of day-to-day 9-to-5 businessman box, right? So what we've done here, right, in thinking about how effective this is as a book cover, right, and what sorts of people he would be aiming this cover, the publisher would be aiming this cover at, right? This is an example of deductive reasoning, right? We started with a general statement about what this is and what it's supposed to do, right? So because we know what it is and we know how it's supposed to work, we're then able to apply the things in the picture to that general principle, right? And determine whether or not this is an effective example of its type, right? So if you know what sort of genre or category something is supposed to belong to, right? If you know how people typically think about some particular object that you're looking at, then you can argue fairly easily deductively, right? I'll give you another example. How many of you are familiar with the movie Alien? Okay, a couple of you, right? What genre would you say Alien belongs to? Science fiction?
Genres.
Pardon?
There's a ton of genres.
Yeah, it can flow
Okay.
between multiple
Uh-huh.
ones, but mainly I would say sci-fi.
Yeah. I would argue that it's actually primarily a horror movie.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
And I could then, right, look at particular characteristics of horror movies, right, what I know about that genre to make my case that Alien looks like a sci-fi movie but is really a horror movie, right? So my lead piece of evidence, for example, is that the person who survives is the one who enforces the rules. Right, in a horror movie, which character usually makes it to the end of the movie?
The one that's like
Careful one.
The a-hole.
Yeah. Yeah, the stick in the mud character, right? The one who doesn't do anything fun, doesn't party, doesn't commit any of the sins that the ones who get chopped up by axe murderers do, right? So the character who avoids sex, who avoids drugs, who avoids
That creepy house.
who tries to stay away from the creepy house, right? Horror movies are morally actually really, really conservative.
Yeah.
And in Alien, the character who survives, the only character who survives, is the one who is most insistent on following all of the ship's rules all of the time. In fact, she's the one who's responsible for enforcing those rules. So, I could find other points. I don't want to belabor this, right? But because I know what the features of a typical horror movie are, right, I can then apply them to a particular case to see whether or not it fits the case. That's deductive reasoning. Now, we're going to try this the other way around now. Instead of thinking about how this picture fits some general claim, general argument about book covers and what book covers are supposed to do, I want you to look at it again and try to come up with as many details as you can, concrete details, right? Specific details, and look for any patterns you can find within those details, right? Things that seem to relate to each other, things that seem to speak to each other, that would allow you to make some sort of claim about the picture that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with its function, right? So take a few minutes and see what you can come up with. It is. If you need to get closer to the picture, go ahead.
Yeah, that's why I thought it was a DNA.
Damn it. Yeah, once again, try to come up with at least 10 specific observations. I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
So you just want us to name the observations? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Start by just trying to come up with
I remember everything you said.
10 specific observations.
All right.
And then try to look for a pattern in those that you think you could use to make a claim about the picture.
Okay.
Take a couple more minutes, keep at it, and really try to generate at least one good claim from your observations. About to hit the switch. Okay. So what'd you come up with? Start with your observations. Okay, both figures are wearing coats. Keep going.
That kind of tells you what time of year it is.
Okay. So you can make some determinations about time of year and the general climate. Yeah. Yeah, Ezra.
I was going to say that because the woman's coat is buttoned up all the way, but there are still leaves on the tree, I was going to specify that time of year.
Okay.
Like early fall in a more northern climate.
Okay. Early fall in a cold climate.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
He's smiling in the picture, but he's staring at the camera. She's smiling, but she's looking away from the camera, which kind of gave me a reason to think that maybe, like, obviously the camera isn't the reason that she's smiling because she's not looking at it, so she's probably a generally happy person. And she probably means a lot to him being that she's on the cover.
Okay, yeah, that's a weird thing in and of itself, right? Is having someone who is not the author on the cover with the author, right? And I think it's also interesting to notice that he's looking right at the camera. But is there something intervening between him and the camera?
The glasses and the...
Yeah, he's wearing glasses. So there's something between your eyes and his eyes. And is there anything else that you notice is odd about the woman being in the picture?
She's sitting down.
Yeah, what's weird about the way she's sitting, Ansley?
It's not like proper.
Okay. In what way?
Her legs are together.
Okay, yeah, her knees are together and her feet are kicking out, right? So she's sort of sitting in a
Comfortable.
yeah, a really kind of posed, casual
Yeah.
kind of way, right? Yeah, not formally composed.
I feel like they had some type of connection. I mean, just the way he's standing over her.
Okay, yeah, he's standing over her, right? She's sitting down. He's standing up above her, right?
Yeah. But I feel like, I mean, it could be a wife or maybe.
Does the picture give us enough information to determine a specific relationship?
Well, they're both relatively the same age, so
Okay, they appear to be relatively the same age,
they
right?
could be married, they could be family members.
That's all I'm
Could
saying. It could be
be
like
the
sister
author's
or-
editor and good
Could be.
friend.
Exactly, yeah. See, the problem is, right, we can only work with what the picture actually gives us, right? So the detail it gives is that we have two adults, one a man, one a woman, who seem to be about the same age. Like, if there's no detail to prove any sort of relationship, right, we can't really infer too much about that relationship. Yeah.
I'm still stuck on the statue, but I feel like you don't take a picture in front of a statue unless that person is like famous or well known.
Well, you don't get a statue typically unless you're famous,
Yeah,
right?
so that's what I'm saying. Like, they could be taking that picture. That person could be some in relation to them, or
Okay, well,
like, you know how everybody be like, "This is my great grandfather. His statue."
Well, the fact that they're under that they're under a statue, the location is probably not chosen arbitrarily, right? They want to demonstrate something by being underneath this statue. So, do we notice? Right, we've got three figures in the picture, right? Three human or human-shaped figures. Do we notice how they're positioned together?
They're in the front and it's in the back.
Yeah, it's in the back. The statue's in the back.
It's not nearly as focused as the
He's kind of the statue is less there's less focus in the statue. But if we look at the picture top to bottom, is there a hierarchy there?
Yeah.
Yeah, we go statue, man, woman. Right, the statue's at the top, the woman is at the bottom.
So is she like not important?
That's what made me think about the connection part. Like, he could be like great granddad, grandson, and then like, you know, she's like the woman in the family, like maybe
Right.
a niece or something, you know.
But again, like we can't.
I know
The
that's
picture
all we
doesn't.
have,
Yeah, the
that's
picture
all we
doesn't
have.
give us that, right? We have to work with the details that are actually in front of us.
Right.
So one thing that the picture does seem to do is kind of rank the figures in it. Now, the one to whom our eye is drawn the most is the man, right? Who is the right? He is the author of the book. His name's Richard Brodigan. The book is called Trout Fishing in America. It's not about trout fishing.
Unigan trout fishing.
What's that?
Unigan trout fishing. It's in your search bar.
Oh,
It's been up there the entire
Oh.
time.
it's Brodigan actually, but it's the right. Yeah, Richard Brodigan, Trout Fishing in America. But yeah, it's called Trout Fishing in America. It's not about trout fishing. It was, like kind of one of these kind of 60s underground novels.
About somebody's journeys as they trout fished in America.
Yes.
Something like
And the journey is the man's and not so much the woman's. If we look at the way she's positioned there, like the way she's sort of sitting at his feet, right?
She rode along the way.
Maybe she was his support.
Yeah, she's there as a support or a sidekick or a disciple even, right? the way she's positioned in the picture, not looking directly at us, at the very bottom of the picture, seated when the other figure is standing. The other figure is, he's sort of casual, right?
Yeah.
But staring at us confidently. She's looking away a little more nervously. Right? Makes it clear that she is supposed to be in a kind of subordinate position here, right? So, what you can do with deductive reasoning, right? If you already have that kind of general idea about something, right, you can, use details that you find in the sample to back up that argument, right? But you get those kinds of general principles, you get those general arguments through inductive reasoning, right? So I could make this argument about horror movies because I've watched a shitload of horror movies, right? And I know what they look like. I know what the common features of the genre are. So I could argue that Alien fits that pattern. I had to do the inductive work first. Now, the argument that we're coming up inductively for this image, right, is more specific and more focused than the deductive process we used, right? We were talking about this solely as a book cover and how effective it was as a book cover, right? Okay, as a means of selling the book. Now we're sort of getting into how the author and his publishers are selling him specifically, right? How the figures in the cover, in the image, make a kind of implicit argument about who's important here, about who matters. Does this make sense? Okay, we're going to carry on along similar lines. Next time, I'll have your enthymeme assignment graded for you by then. So we'll see you on Thursday.